Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. Hold on while I just make a quick adjustment to my camera because I see that we're having some focusing issues. 1 second. Okay, that should solve the problem. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Lamed Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Kriyas Sefer Torah, the halachas that pertain to Kriyas HaTorah, Tolening. We pick up today on the very bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Daf Chav Tes Amid Beis, Siman Kuf Mem Zayin Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber. Yachal mi sheyirtzeh. If somebody desires to do so, he is able to do what? Liknois, to purchase a very interesting kibud. Liknois, lahoshit hami'ilin lagoylil. The right to hand the gartel, the mantle, the coverings of the Sefer Torah to the goylil. So this would kind of be, I compared this to by a bris. We have the sandik. The sandik is the one who holds the baby. Then we have a kibbutz called al yad hasandik. Al yad hasandik is the one who maybe gives the sandik and takes the baby from the kisei shel Eliyahu and gives the baby to the sandik. But this is kind of like an assistant. So we have an assistant to the sandik, and over here we have an assistant to the goyel. The goyel is going to close the Sefer Torah, put on the gartel, put on the mantle. Now we have an assistant. He has the right to take the gartel and give it to the goyel, to take the mantle and give it to the goyel. So the point of the Mechaber is somebody went ahead and purchased the right to be the goyel. Now somebody wants to take away part of his job from him. Somebody else buys the right to hand the necessary materials to the goyel. Is that okay? Says the Mechaber, yes. If somebody wants to, he can purchase the right to give the coverings of the Sefer Torah to the goyel. And the goyel who paid money for the right to do Gelilah cannot protest. Because even though he purchased the right to do the Gelilah, that does not come together with the right to take the coverings by himself. Says the Ramah, so too, in a place where they're noyig to either give out or to sell the kibud of Hoitzava Hachnasa, the Shliach Tzibur cannot protest. Because that's not an automatic part of the job of being a chazan. In other words, you might have thought like this. Strictly speaking, there is no need for a middleman to go up to the Sefer Torah, take out the Sefer Torah, or to have a middleman who's going to take the Sefer Torah from the one who did Hagbah and then bring it to the Aron Kodesh and hand it. Well, the way it works, the chazan is the one who takes the Sefer Torah from the one who had Hagbah, and he brings it to the Aron Kodesh and hands it to the one who had Eitzav Achnasa. Really, the chazan could take out the Sefer Torah from the Aron himself and bring it to the bima, and when he brings it back to the Aron, he could put it straight into the Aron by himself. Why does he have to hand it off or take it from somebody who has Eitzav Achnasa? Says the Mechaber, no. If it's in a tzibur where the minig is to be mechabit somebody with Eitzav Achnasa, or sell the right of Eitzav Achnasa to somebody, and we said earlier that it's a mailu to do that, because Baroiv Am Hadras Melech, the more people that we could involve in being involved and busy with the Sefer Torah, that's a bigger kibud to the Sefer Torah. You could do that because this is not automatically part of the job of being the chazan. We have one short little Mishnah Berurah over here. Ois Katan Tezvav, Lamed Amud Aleph, says the Chavetz Chaim, Aval chazan Molichai Lebima. He says that while it's true that you could be mechabit somebody with Haitzav Achnasa, or you could sell Haitzav Achnasa, the one who gets Haitzav Achnasa does not bring the Sefer Torah to the Bima or bring it back from the Bima to the Aron. That is the job of the Chazan. Now we go to Sif Gimel. 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch Lamed Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber. Hagoylel Sefer Torah, and over here the word Hagoylel, which we've seen before, refers to the one who has Hagbah. And by the way, we're going to see that the reason we call the one who has Hagbah the Goylel, and I mentioned this previously, is because really he is the main one who rolls the Sefer Torah closed. Let's remember, he does Hagbah, he's holding the Sefer Torah. When he sits down, he's still holding the Sefer Torah, and he's rolling the Sefer Torah closed. The Goylel, the one that we call the Goylel, the one who has Gelilah, he assists the Magbiah in closing the Sefer Torah. He puts his hands on the top of Tzachayim and he helps roll it closed. But he's not actually holding the Sefer Torah. So we're going to see that the one that we call the Magbiah, the one who has Hagbah, is really the Iker Goylel. He's really the main one involved in the Gelilah. And that's why the Mechaber sometimes calls him the Goylel. And that's the case here in Siv Gimel. HaGoylel Sefer Torah, the one who has Hagbah and rolls the Sefer Torah closed, Ya'amidenu Keneged HaTefer. When he picks the Sefer Torah up, he should align the Sefer Torah so that there's a seam. We know that the Sefer Torah is made up out of separate urios, separate sections of parchment that have writing on them, and then they're stitched together at the seams. When you do a Hagbah, you're supposed to do a Hagbah and you're supposed to position a seam in the middle so that you're doing the Hagbah on a seam. That's what the Mechaber means here. Hagol Sefer Torah Yamidenu Keneged HaTefer. He should position it so that there's a seam in the middle. Kedei she'im yikara, so that if Chas v'Chalila the Sefer Torah tears, yikara HaTefer, it should tear at the seam. The point over here is this. When you do Hagbah and you pick up the Sefer Torah and you spread the two sides of the Sefer Torah apart, you're placing stress on the parchment of the Sefer Torah, right? You're pulling the two sides of the Sefer Torah apart, so you're stressing the cloth of the Sefer Torah. Now, whenever you put stress on something like parchment, there is always the possibility, chas v'chalila, of the parchment tearing. Now, let's imagine, chas v'chalila, that the parchment tears. If the parchment would tear in middle of a urea, so it might tear right smack in the middle of an amud of writing of the Sefer Torah, it would passel the Sefer Torah. Even if it rips between two amudim, it's still ripped not on a seam. You might have like a jagged tear. How are you going to repair it? You might ruin the entire Sefer Torah. But if you put a seam in the middle when you do Hagbah, so then if the stress is too much, it will tear on the seam. The stitching will tear apart. That's easily repairable. You just bring it to a cipher who will take a needle and gidon, basically a needle and thread, and he'll stitch it back together again. So to protect the Sefer Torah, we want that when you do Hagbah, there should be a seam in the middle. Okay, no Mishnah Berurah Sif Gimel, let's go to Sif Daled. Now, Sif Daled, we have to be very, very careful how we read Sif Daled. We have to read it accurately. Says the Mechaber like this. Hagoylel Sefer Torah. Now, over here, when we're saying Hagoylel, I'm going to translate it as meaning the one that we call the Goylel, the one who has Gelilah. And we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah what the Mechaber means to say is like this. Hagoylel Sefer Torah. When one is doing Gelilah. Now, when you do Gelilah, what do? The first step is you assist the Magbiah in rolling the Sefer Torah closed. Now you have the Sefer Torah closed. Now what do? What we do is we take a gartel and we put a gartel around the Sefer Torah. Nowadays, the most common kind of gartel that we have is the gartel with some kind of a buckle. It has some kind of a clasp on one side. Generally speaking, our gartel have elastic inside them so that they stretch. What do? We take the gartel, we stretch it around the Sefer Torah, going from the back of the Sefer Torah to the front of the Sefer Torah. The front of the Sefer Torah is where it opens. That's facing the one who had Hagbah. The one who had Hagbah is sitting down. The Ksav, the writing of the Sefer Torah, is facing him. The Goylel is standing by the back of the Sefer Torah. He takes the gartel, he stretches it from the back of the Sefer Torah around the front of the Sefer Torah, and he buckles it. When I was young, when I was a child, we didn't have gartlich with a buckle. What did we have? We had basically a gartel, a belt, a long belt. What did we do? We took it, we stretched it from the back of the Sefer Torah around the front, and usually it was too long, so we went around to the front, then we crossed it, came back around to the back, then we crossed it again, went back around to the front, and then we tied it at the front. Now, there's another type of gartel, which mostly nowadays is only used in Yekisha Kehillas. I think they call it a wimple. What's that? That is not just a gartel. It's usually a wide cloth, and it's very long. And it gets wrapped around the Sefer Torah numerous times. And I've seen that they wrap it also not only just around the middle or near the top, they wrap it and wrap it and wrap it. It goes like top, not all the way from the top to the bottom of the Sefer Torah, but it covers up quite a bit of the height of the Sefer Torah. And they go around and around and around and around and around and around. And then ultimately they take the two ends and they don't tie it. What they do is they come around to the front of the Sefer Torah and they tuck it in. Now this last case of this wimple that is most similar to what the Mechaber is going to discuss over here. So the Mechaber says like this: Gelilah Sefer Torah, the one who's doing the Gelilah, the one who's doing the wrapping around the Sefer Torah, Gelilah mibachutz. He should start the wrapping from the back of the Sefer Torah, the closed side of the Sefer Torah. Now let me tell you, I'll speak out some of what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say so that we can understand what's at work over here. We have a Magbiah. The Magbiah did Hagbah. Now, when the Magbiah does Hagbah, the Ksav of the Sefer Torah is facing him. So he picks up the Sefer Torah with the open side of the Sefer Torah facing him. And he turns around to show the Sefer Torah to the Gelilah. Now he sits down. Now, back in the day, the whole process of Gelilah, of Hagbah and Gelilah, was done by one person. It wasn't two separate kibbutz. It was done by one person. So now, he sits down. What does he have to do? He has to roll the Sefer Torah closed, and then he has to wrap the Sefer Torah. Says the Mechaber, when you wrap the Sefer Torah, now exactly how did one person do this? The only thing I can imagine is that he rested the Sefer Torah in his lap, so that the bottom Atzrichayim of the Sefer Torah resting in his lap. Maybe he rested the Sefer Torah on his body, the uncovered and untied Sefer Torah. He rolled it closed and he rested on his body. Now he took the wrappings, and now he has to wrap up the Sefer Torah. Says the Mechaber, when you wrap up the Sefer Torah, start from the back of the Sefer Torah, from the closed side. So you're going to take the wrapping, put it over, right? If you're the Magbiah, you're sitting down, you have the Sefer Torah sitting like this, take the wrapping, put it over the Sefer Torah, and start wrapping from the back of the Sefer Torah. And bring the wrappings around to the front. And then if it's long, cross it in the front, go back to the back to the front. Why? Very simple. Because what the Mechaber wanted to stress is the importance that when you first take the wrapping, you put it over the back so that you're pulling the Sefer Torah towards you. Don't put the wrapping around the front of the Sefer Torah, because then when you pull the wrapping, you'll be pulling the wrapping away from you, and now you're risking that the Sefer Torah could fall down. Because what's protecting the Sefer Torah in the back? Nothing. You're sitting down, you have the Sefer Torah leaning on you. There's no Gelilah, so there's nobody standing in front of you. If you take the wrapping, put it between your body and the Sefer Torah, that's the front of the Sefer Torah with the Ksav facing you. If you would put the wrapping there and now pull the wrapping to go around to the back, you're actually putting pressure on the Sefer Torah and you're pushing the Sefer Torah away from you, and it could fall. We don't want that to happen. So put it around the back and draw the Sefer Torah to you. Then if you have to, cross it, and now pull it, and now go around to the back, but now the Sefer Torah is already more secure. So that seems to be the point of what the Mechaber is saying. So again, the Mechaber says like this: Gelilah Sefer Torah, the one who's doing the Gelilah, the one who's wrapping up the Sefer Torah, Gelilah mibachutz. Start the wrapping from the outside of the Sefer Torah. What's the outside? The back, the closed side of the Sefer Torah. Ukeshuhu mahadkai, and then when you finish the wrapping and now you're going to tie it, mahadkai mi bifnim, tie it on the inside where the Sefer Torah opens. Why do you tie it on the inside? Very simple. You tie it on the inside, that way next time they take the Sefer Torah out and they put the Sefer Torah down on the bima, the tie is going to be facing up. If you tie it on the back, then when you put the Sefer Torah in the bima, the knot is and the bow is on the bottom, and you have to flip the Sefer Torah over in order to get to it. We don't want that. That's not hakavadik. So start the wrapping from the back in order to pull the Sefer Torah towards you and secure the Sefer Torah. Make the knot on the inside of the Sefer Torah so that next time you put the Sefer Torah down, you'll be able to open it without turning the Sefer Torah over. So again, ha-goylel Sefer Torah, goylel mibachutz. Start the wrapping from the outside. Ukishu mahatkai, and then when you tie it, mahatkai mibifnim, tie it on the inside. And now the Ramah is going to speak out some of what we just said over here. Says the Ramah, Haga, Pirish. The explanation of what the Mechaber is saying is like this. Kesha sefer oimid lefanov, when the sefer is standing in front of you, yeh haksav neged ponov. This is talking about the Magbia. When the one who's doing a Hagbah picks up the Sefer Torah, yeh haksav neged ponov. The writing of the Sefer Torah, so that's the open side of the Sefer Torah, should be opposite his face. He should be looking into the Ksav. V'yaschil liglol mibachutz. But when he starts to wrap the Sefer Torah, that's what liglol means over here. When he begins to wrap the Sefer Torah, he should begin to wrap it from the outside. V'achar shegamar hagelilah, and after he finishes wrapping the Sefer Torah, yahadek soifan mipachas bifnim. He should tie or tuck in the end of the wrapping on the inside, on the open side of the Sefer Torah. Why? Shekishayavai likreis by, so that next time when they put the Sefer Torah down to lane from it, yimtza hahiduk bifnim, the tied part should be on the inside of the Sefer Torah, where the Sefer Torah opens, v'lo yitztarach lahapech ha-Sefer Torah, so that they don't have to flip the Sefer Torah over in order to get to the knot, to untie the knot and untie the Sefer Torah. Now, says the Ramah, based on everything that I just told you, he says like this, V'nira, and it would seem to me, says the Ramah, D'chol zeh, all of this. What does he mean, all of this? The Mishnah Berurah is going to explain. V'nira, it seems to me, says the Ramah, D'chol zeh, all of this that we're saying based on the Mechaber, that the Ksav of the Sefer Torah should be facing the one that we're calling the Gelilah, right? Because the only mention over here in Sif Daled, we don't talk about a Magbia. We only talk about a Gelilah. But what I'm telling you again is, in here in Sif Daled, the Mechaber is using the word Gelilah to mean the Magbia, the one who does Hagbah, because the Mechaber is really addressing a case where it's one person that's doing the Hagbah and the Gelilah. Therefore, says the Ramah, V'nira d'chol zeh, this that the Mechaber writes this in such a way where the understanding of it is based on the fact that the Ksav, the writing of the Sefer Torah, is facing the one that he calls the Gelilah, V'nira d'chol zeh, mayri kishe'echad oisek kol hagelilah, where the job of Hagbah and Gelilah are both being done by one person. That's when you could say that the writing of the Sefer Torah is facing the Gelilah, because we're calling the Magbia the Gelilah, and the Ksav of the Sefer Torah is facing the Magbia. So again, this that it says here in Sif Daled, Ha-Gelilah Sefer Torah, Gelilah mibachutz, u'kushu mahadkoi mibifnim. When the Mechaber says that, and the Ramah explained what it means, and it comes out that the Ksav of the Sefer Torah is facing the one that we're calling the Gelilah, that's when Hagbah and Gelilah are both being done by one person. So v'nira d'chol zeh ma'yu kishe'echad oisek kol hagelilah. Aval achshav, but nowadays, shenoi hagim shoy echad magbia ve'echad Gelilah. Now, when we have two separate kibudim, Hagba and Gelilah, haksav neged hamagbia, we wouldn't say that the writing is facing the Gelilah. It's not. The Gelilah, the one who we call the Gelilah, the one who only helps roll the Sefer Torah closed and ties it closed and puts on the mantle, the ksav of the Sefer Torah is not facing him. He's standing opposite the Magbia. The Magbia is sitting down, and he has the Ksav facing him. The Gelilah is standing opposite him. The Gelilah is facing the back of the Sefer Torah, not the Ksav. So, Aval Akshav nowadays, Shenoi Hagim Shoy Echad Magbia ve'Echad Gelilah, where one person does Hagba and one person does Gelilah, Haksav Yeh Neged HaMagbia. In that case, the writing of the Sefer Torah is facing the Magbia, not the Gelilah. V'chei noyagim, and that's the way we are noyig. Kihu ikar hagoylil v'ha'oichiz hasefer Torah. That's the way we're noyig. We're noyig that there are two different kibudim. There's a magbia and there's a goylil. So we would not make the statement that the ksav is facing the goylil. We would say that the ksav is facing the magbia. This that the mechaber suggests that the ksav is facing the goylil is because he calls the Magbia the Gelilah. Why does he call the Magbia the Gelilah? He calls the Magbia the Gelilah because in his day and age there was only one person who did both. And you called him the Gelilah because he was the one who rolled the Sefer Torah closed. But we have a Magbia and a Gelilah, and the fact by us is that the Ksav faces the Magbia, not the Gelilah. Now the last words of the Ramah here, when he says, V'chein noyagim, Ki hu ikar hagoylil v'ha'oichiz hasefer Torah. What the Ramah is explaining is why taka. Why is it that way? Why is it that what we do is that the ksav is facing the magbia and not the goylil? And in a very terse, very succinct way, the Ramah gives the answer. He says ki hu ikar hagoylil, because the Magbia is really the Iker Gelilah, v'ha'oichiz ha-Sefer Torah, and the one holding the Sefer Torah. How does that answer the question? I'll tell you. Give you a little heads up from the Mishnah Berurah. Because the Ksav of the Sefer Torah is supposed to be facing the main person who's being oisik with the Sefer Torah. Over here, we have two different people being oisik in the Sefer Torah. We have a Magbia that's being oisik with the Sefer Torah. We have a Gelilah that's being oisik with the Sefer Torah. On a scale of 1 to 10, which one is being oisik more with the Sefer Torah than the other one? The answer is the Magbia. The Magbia gets a 7, the Gelilah gets a 3. Why? Because the Magbia is both the Iker Gelilah. He's the one who really does most of the work of closing the Sefer Torah, and he's the one that's holding the Sefer Torah. So he is being oisik with the Sefer Torah more than the one that we call the Gelilah. Since he's being oisik with the Sefer Torah more, the open side of the Sefer Torah should be facing him, because that's a bigger kibud to the Sefer Torah, that its open side is facing the one that's being oisik with it more. So again, a very fascinating, I found this sif to be a very fascinating sif. So just to recap, before we see the Mishnah Berurah, the halachas that we have over here in Sif Daled are, we're being instructed really the proper way to do Gelilah. When you do Gelilah, the gartel, or the type of gartel we have that has a buckle, or the old-fashioned long gartel that has to be wrapped around numerous times, or the vimple, whatever device you're using to tie the Sefer Torah closed, you have to begin from the back of the Sefer Torah and wrap around to the front. If you have to cross over and come back, and then cross over and go back, you could do that. But you have to start from the back of the Sefer Torah and go to the front. When you tie it, or fasten it, however you fasten it, the fastenings have to be in the front. Why is this? The basic answer is, the reason is, we want you to start from the back so that you're never putting pressure on the Sefer Torah to pull the Sefer Torah, either if it's one person doing it, If there's one person, a Magbiah, who's doing the Gelilah also, we don't want him to be using the gartel to push the Sefer Torah away from him, and then the Sefer Torah could simply fall on the ground. What's securing it? Nothing is securing it, right? There's nobody standing in front of him. He's doing the whole job all by himself. He's got the gartel right now, doesn't go around the other side at all. If he's starting from the front of the Sefer, so he's starting between him and the Sefer Torah, he's literally pushing the Sefer Torah off his lap, and it could chas v'chalila fall on the floor. So start the wrapping from the back, pull the Sefer Torah towards you. Now let's say it's too long, so you'll cross, and now you'll go to the back. You're pushing the Sefer Torah away. It's true, you might be pushing the Sefer Torah away, but you're holding the gartel, and the gartel already went around the back of the Sefer Torah and crossed over. So as long as you're holding the gartel, the Sefer Torah can't fall. So at that point, it's not so bad if you go around to the back. So too nowadays, the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, this same halacha applies nowadays. Why? Because even though nowadays we have a Magbiah and a Gelilah, we don't want the one doing Gelilah to take the gartel, put it over the Sefer Torah so that he's starting the wrapping from the open side between the Magbiah and the Sefer Torah and pull the Sefer Torah towards him. Because even though he's standing in the front and theoretically, if the Sefer Torah would fall, he could catch it, we don't want to do that. We don't want to create a situation where the Sefer Torah might fall, but you'll catch it. No. So again, we want the girl to start from the back of the Sefer Torah and push the Sefer Torah towards the Magbiah who's holding it. That's, in essence, what we have over here. In the middle, we see these different minhagim. The old minig that one person did Hag ben Gelilah, the minig that we have now that two people do Hag ben Gelilah. And we see that even with our minig of Hag ben Gelilah, the ksav of the Sefer Torah should always be facing the Magbiah. It should not be facing the Goel. Now, in the Mishnah Berurah, we're going to see, you might have thought not that way. You might have thought that there's a milah to have the open side of the Sefer Torah facing the tzibur, like we do on Simchas Torah. Why? Very simple. The whole point of Hagbah is to show the ksav to the tzibur. So why should the ksav be facing me? And if I do Hagbah low down, I'm interposed between the tzibur and the Sefer Torah. Let me turn it the other way and show it to them like that. The answer is, says the Rama, no. We are always going to keep the ksav of the Sefer Torah facing the Magbiah, because the covet of the Sefer Torah is that the ksav of the Sefer Torah should be facing the one who's being oisik with the Sefer Torah the most. And that's the Magbiah, not the Goel. Okay, so against that very lengthy backdrop, let's see the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Tezayin. Pirish the Rama said, Kisha ha-sefer oimid lefanav. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Ramah is saying is like this. Hainu, deloi nitel lefaresh. We should not make a mistake and try to explain the words of the Mechaber as follows. Masha amru goyleloi mi bachutz. Maybe when the Mechaber said, ha-goylel sefer Torah goylel mi bachutz, maybe what he means is like this. Dikeshehu oichiz ba'amudei ha-sefer Torah. Maybe what the Mechaber means is like this. When he says Hagoylel, maybe he means the Magbiah. And he means like this. Hagoylel Sefer Torah, when you do Hagbah, Goylel mi bachutz. You should do a Hagbah so that the back of the Sefer Torah is facing you, and the open side of the Sefer Torah is facing the Tzibur. Maybe that's how you should teach the beginning of Sif Daled. So look again, 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mechaber, and I'll read it to you according to that pshat. Hagoylel Sefer Torah, Rabbi Isai, we know sometimes when the Mechaber says Hagoylel, he means the one who has Hagbah. So Hagoylel Sefer Torah, the one who has Hagbah, Goylel mi bachutz. He should do a Hagbah so that the back of the Sefer Torah is facing him, and the open side of the Sefer Torah is facing the Tzibur. Why? Because he wants to show the Ksav to the Tzibur. Maybe you should learn the Mechaber that way. Says the Ramah, no, you can't learn it that way. And explains the Mishnah Berurah, and here in Eis Katan Tezayin, Hainu, deloi nitel lefarish, don't make a mistake, and explain the Mechaber, that what the Mechaber is saying is, Masha amru goyleloi mi bachutz, when the Mechaber says goyleloi mi bachutz, he means, Dikeshu oichiz ba'amudei ha-sefer Torah, when he's holding the Atzei Chaim, laharois haksav la'am, to do a Hagbah and show the writing of the Sefer Torah to the Tzibur, yitzamtzem la'achsa, He should hold it so that the back of the Sefer Torah is facing him. And if he would do it that way, then be'ez sheyirtza lasis Gelilah, when he sits down and he wants to do the Gelilah, gam kein tiyeh ha-Gelilah rak me'achorei ha-sefer, then you would think that he's going to start wrapping the Sefer Torah also from the back. Kein aksav neged panav, because the writing is not facing him. Val kein kamash balan, so that you should not make this mistake. The Ramah is telling me the loichenu. That's not pshat in the Mechaber. Da'av shah mitzvah laharis aksav la'am, because even though the main point of Hagbah is to show the writing of the Sefer Torah to the tzibur, k'diisa b'mesechta seifrim, afilu hachi, even so, tzarich liyos aksav neged panav shela oiches Sefer Torah. The writing has to be facing the one who's holding the Sefer Torah. Kain be'ez Hagbah, both during the Hagbah, v'chein be'ez ha-Gelilah, and so too at the time of Gelilah. The ksav of the Sefer Torah always has to be facing the Magbiah. The kevan chu oisik b'Sefer Torah, because since he is the main one being oisik with the Sefer Torah, kavod ha-Torah hu liyos ksav neged panav. The bigger kavod ha-Torah is that the ksav should be facing him. Umasha oimroi goyloloi mi bachutz. And what the Mechaber means when he says ha-Goylol Sefer Torah goylol mi bachutz, he's not talking about Hagbah. Hainu das chalas ha-Gelilah yia mi bachutz. He means that the Gelilah, the wrapping of the Sefer Torah, should start from the back of the Sefer Torah, the closed side, kasher neva'er b'sifkat shach hazeh, like the Mishnah Berurah says I'm about to explain in the coming Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah v'yaschil ligloil, you should start to do the wrapping, pirush. What's the pirush of these words? V'yaschil ligloil, pirush. Tchilas hanachas hamitpachas ala Sefer Torah, the beginning of the wrapping of the Sefer Torah, yia mi bachutz, should be from the outside. You should put the gartel, the vimple, whatever it is, you should start it from the back of the Sefer Torah and draw it around to the front. V'ayin b'machzah shekel, take a look at the machzah shekel, shebetzadid loymar, who takes the position to say, Tizeu dafka lefi shamasik haramah, that really this requirement to start the Gelilah from the back of the Sefer Torah is only according to the maskana of the Ramah, demayri kishabal hagba oisegam kein ha-Gelilah. The machzah shekel wants to say that this halacha, that you have to start the wrapping from the back of the Sefer Torah, the Machzah Shekel suggests maybe that's only true according to the Mechaber. According to the minig of the Mechaber, where you only had one person doing Hagbah and Gelilah, where there was a tremendous risk that if you would start the wrapping of the Sefer Torah from the front, between the body of the Magbiah and the Sefer Torah, you might chas v'Gelilah push the Sefer Torah to the floor. V'al kein chayshinon, that's when we have to be concerned, shem yaskel ha-Gelilah mitzad pnim, that if you would start the Gelilah from the inside, yesh lochush chas v'shalom, you have to worry chas v'Gelilah, shetipal ha-Sefer Torah l'tzad chutz, that the Sefer Torah might fall out. Masha ein kein kishamaskel mi bachutz, but if you start from the outside, the ef sheshetipal l'chutz, it can't fall out. Ta machzika b'mapeh shamaskel l'gloi svivoi, because you're holding on to the gartel. You're pulling it towards you. Avol, says the Machzah Shekel, lefi minagenu, according to our minig, where we have one Magbiah and one Goyl, she'echad Magbiah v'asheni Goyl, delekel amechash kol kach, there isn't such a great concern that the Sefer Torah shetipal, that it's going to fall. The kevet shabala Gelilah oimed luftei Sefer Torah, because the one doing Gelilah is standing in front of the Sefer Torah. Ef shetipal mehera v'lo yargish. It's not likely that the Goyl is going to put the Sefer Torah over the Sefer, pull it, and the Sefer Torah is going to fall and he's not going to catch it. Efshir de im yirtze yuchal haskell Goyl mitzad pnim. The Machzah Shekel says it's possible that nowadays that we have a Magbiah and a Goyl, you could start wrapping the Sefer Torah from the inside because we're not so concerned. V'chein minagenu shein makpid bazeh. The Chavetz Chaim says it's tak our minig, we're not makpid. Guess what? We are makpid. I never saw a place where they do Gelilah and they start from the inside of the Sefer Torah, between the Sefer Torah and the Magbiah. We always start from the back of the Sefer Torah. Yeah. Ois Kod Yud Ches, v'nireh d'chol zeh mayri. And the Ramah said, it seems that all of this, all of what? This that the Mechaber is saying that the Ksav of the Sefer Torah faces the one who he calls the Gelilah. That's only according to their minig that the Magbia and the Gelilah were one and the same. But according to our minig that there's a Magbia and a Gelilah, we would never say that the Ksav of the Sefer Torah is facing the Gelilah. It's not. It's facing the Magbia. V'nira the Cholzamari, Ashmi'inon, the Ramah is telling me, the loy name of Dezesha Kasu Shaksav Yeneged Panov. Don't say that the Mechaber says that the writing of the Sefer Torah is facing the person. V'hainu neged pnei HaGoylil. It's facing the Goylil. Kavanosam. His kavana is heicha de echad magbia ve'echad Goylil shetzarch lias aksav neged pnei HaGoylil dafka makmashu osik ba'oz. You might suggest, we have a Mechaber, the Mechaber says that the Ksav is facing the Goylil. Maybe that's when you have two separate people. The Echad Magbia ve'echad Goylil shetzarch lias aksav neged pnei HaGoylil dafka makmashu osik ba'oz. V'achari aksav tzaroich Sefer Torah lo zeh kasav d'loichenu. The Bizmanam Haya Minig in their days the minig was She'echad Asa Hagba v'gam Gelilah. In their days the minig was one person did both. Val Kain Isramei Oz Memela Shaksav Haya Neged Pnei HaGoylil. When the Mechaber says that the Ksav is facing the Goylil, that's because the Magbia and the Goylil were one person. Aval be'emes heichad echad Magbia ve'echad Goylil. But the truth is that when you have one person doing Hagba and one person doing Gelilah, yeah, Ksav Neged HaMagbia Levad. Then the Ksav is facing the Magbia, not the Goylil. Kihu ikroi shala Gelilah, because he's doing the main Gelilah. Shehu oiches a Sefer Torah b'yodoi, because he's the one holding the Sefer Torah. Ois cut your test ikra Goylil mashma shahagba hi yoyse mitzvah megelilah. What you see comes out from this agav orcha is that which one is a bigger mitzvah, Hagba or Gelilah? L'chara Hagba, because we're calling him the ikr. He's the ikra Goylil. So it's a bigger mitzvah. V'alkein, therefore, misha noisted loy Sefer Torah lahagbia v'ligloil. If you give a person a Sefer Torah for Hagba and Gelilah, v'iev shaloi lasishtein, you mechabed somebody, do Hagba and Gelilah as one. We're not going to make two different kibudim. We're going to do one. You take Hagba and Gelilah. And then he says, I can't manage to do the Gelilah while I'm holding the Sefer Torah. So now you're going to give away half of it. Yagbia, the one who you gave it to, should do the Hagba. V'yitin la'acher ligloil. But don't take away the Hagba from the one that you gave both to. But if you gave somebody a kibud that he has the right to take the mantle and the gartel and do the Gelilah, but let's say you gave one person a dual kibud. But what's the dual kibud? That he has the right to take the mantle and take the gartel and put them on the Sefer Torah. And somehow he says he can't do both. Maybe he can't reach from the Sefer Torah to the Bima. So he needs an assistant to hand it to him. Then HaGelilah Adifa, then the bigger kibud is the one actually doing the Gelilah, to he Ikra Mitzvah, because that's the Ikra Mitzvah of Gelilah, V'yitel Achel HaHoshit, and give a second person the kibud to hand him the gartel and the mantle, etc. Very interesting sif that took some time to figure out. Okay, now we go to Sif Hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines off the bottom, middle of the line in the Shulchan Aruch. Mutav tigoylel hamitpachas saviv haSefer Torah. If the gartel is long and it has to be wrapped around the Sefer Torah multiple times, turn and wrap the gartel around the Sefer Torah. Don't spin the Sefer Torah to wind the gartel around it. Don't spin the Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't hold on to the gartel and spin the Sefer Torah svivai so that it gets wrapped around. That's not a covenant Torah. This is very interesting. Technically speaking, you could be goylel a Sefer Torah while it's in the mantle. Why do you have to take the Sefer Torah out of the mantle? You have to untie the gartel. But untie the gartel, leave the Sefer Torah in the mantle, and be goyel the Sefer Torah in the mantle. Says the Mechaber, no. Ha-goyel Sefer Torah b'sech ha-tiktoya. Somebody who tries to be goyel the Sefer Torah while it's in the mantle, he's making a mistake. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirish, Shein Moitziyah Me'atik, he doesn't take it out of the mantle, the Gelilah mibifnim, and he rolls the Sefer Torah while it's covered with the mantle, which you might think is a bigger covered HaTorah. You can make such a cheshbon. Why should I uncover the Sefer Torah needlessly? Right? Something that's bakavedik, you don't expose it unless there's a necessity to expose it. Why are you exposing the Sefer Torah? Keep it in the mantle and be goyel it in the mantle. Every now and then you have to give a peek inside to see what you're up to. Give a peek inside. But why should you uncover it for nothing? The Mechaber says, no, you're making a mistake. The Mishnah Berurah explains why. He says, because now you might rip the Sefer Torah. If you're not watching the Sefer Torah while you're doing the Gelilah, while you're being goyel it, you might rip the Sefer Torah. Maybe the Sefer Torah will get caught up on the Atzei Chaim, right? We know sometimes the cloth falls down or it moves up. It gets tied up on the wheels. So you have to watch the ureas of the Sefer Torah while you're goyel the Sefer Torah in order to make sure everything is working out properly. Sif Zayin, 4 lines from the bottom near the end of the line. Says the Mechaber, Ein hamaftir maschil. The maftir cannot start to make the brachas and lane the HaTorah ad sheyigmaru liglayla Sefer Torah, until the Sefer Torah is all closed up. So at the end of laning on Shabbos, right? After maftir, you do Hagba, Gelilah. Now the one who had maftir is ready to lane from the Navi. The maftir cannot start to lane from the Navi, which the Mishnah Berurah is going to say he can't even start to make the brachas until the Sefer Torah is all closed up. So again, ha'ena maftir maschil, the maftir cannot begin to lane the HaTorah from the Navi ad sheyigmaru liglal Sefer Torah, until they completely have finished closing up the Sefer Torah, kedei shelo yehei hagoylel tarud, so that the goylel should not be busy when the Navi starts. V'yuchal lishmaya HaTorah. We want the goyel to be able to hear the HaTorah. So don't start the HaTorah while he's busy doing the work of the tzibur and closing up the Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton chavbeis maschil. The maftir cannot begin afilu loymar birchas HaTorah. You might say, let him start making the brachas, tercha de tzibura. Let them after start making the brachas on the Navi, so the goyel will listen to the brachas and he'll say Amen. But he's not going to miss the laning of the HaTorah. No. Says the Mishnah Berurah, afilu loymar birchas HaTorah. You can't even start making the brachas on the HaTorah until the Navi is all closed up. Avo b'sheni v'chamishi, but on Mondays and Thursdays, sha'imrim yihiratzon achar akriya, where the Baal Tfilah, the Baal Shachris, says the Yihiratzons and Achenu Kabeis Yisrael after the laning, ain't tzarich lahamten ala goyel. He could say that during the Gelilah. He doesn't have to wait for the goyel to finish. De'ena ela minig, because those Yihiratzons are only a minig, they're not me'ikar adin. Ais katnuchav gimel, the master has to wait until he finishes Gelilah Sefer Torah. Ayin b'primigadim shekasav. The minig lahamtin, the minig is to wait at etzem gemar Gelilah Sefer levad, just until they finish closing the Sefer Torah. Even if they didn't tie it and put the mantle on. The typical minig nowadays is really to wait until Gelilah is totally finished, until the Sefer is completely closed up. Sif, Ches, 3 lines from the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch, beginning of the line. B'yom sheyesh bo shnei sifrei Torah. On a day when we take out 2 Sifrei Torah. So, for example, a typical Yom Tov, where we lay in the first 5 primary aliyahs of Yom Tov from one Sefer, then we have a second Sefer for the Maftir. So says the Mechaber, B'yom sheyesh bo shnei Sifrei Torah, on a day when we are laying from 2 Sifrei Torah, how should we do this? Says the Mechaber, Lo yiftechu hasheni, you don't open the second Sefer Torah, V'lo yosiru hamapa, you don't even take off the mantle from the second Sefer Torah, ad sheyiglalu harishain, until the Gelilah is complete on the first Sefer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chav Daled, Lo yiftechu hashniya, you don't open up the second Sefer Torah, she'ein oisin mitzvahs chavilois chavilois. This is a great klal in Shas. We don't bundle up mitzvahs. You know, when we think about bundling things up, we bundle things up when we want to save time, we want to kill two birds with one stone. Why do you want to kill two birds with one stone? Because you have something that you want to knock off. If I can knock off three things at the same time, great, I save time. Not by mitzvahs. By mitzvahs, if you have 3 mitzvahs to do one mitzvah, then do the second mitzvah, then do the third mitzvah. So we don't want to have over here on the Sefer Torah, on the Bima, 2 open Sifrei Torah. So yeah, we're busy with this Sefer Torah, but we're almost finished. We'll have this one opened already. We're saving time. No. Finish with one, then start with the next. So that's the reason for this. And we don't open the second one, until the Gelilah is finished on the first one. It's even closed with the mantle. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah, 2 lines from the bottom, right by the Ois Katan Chavav of the Mishnah Berurah. Haga. Ve'ein misalkin a we don't remove the first Sefer Torah from the Bima, first, we put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima. Because we don't want to be Mesiach Das. So, in other words, we're laning for the first Sefer Torah. We're done. We did Chamishi already. It's a regular Yom Tov. We did Chamishi. We finished. Now, really, it's time to put the first Sefer Torah away and use the second Sefer Torah from after. So the first halacha we saw is we can't open the second Sefer Torah until the Gelilah on the first Sefer Torah is completely finished. But what do? You don't leave somebody holding the second Sefer Torah. Do Hag B'Gelilah on the first Sefer Torah, wrap it up, then put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima. No, we put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima first. So that now you're going to have 2 Sifrei Torah on the Bima. You're going to have the first Sefer Torah that's still opened, and you're going to have the closed Sefer Torah. Now you're going to do Hag B'Gelilah on the first Sefer Torah, finish the Gelilah, and then open the second Sefer Torah. Why? Says the Ramah, because if we're going to take the first Sefer Torah off the Bima before we put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima, it's like we're Mesiach Das from laning. It looks like laning is done. It's over. No more Sifrei Torah. Oh, whoops, we have one more. Put it on the Bima. No, we don't want that. So we want to make sure that there's always a Sefer Torah on the Bima. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chavav, Ve'ein Misalkin min HaShulchan. We don't take the first Sefer Torah off the Bima, the Shulchan is the Bima, until we put the second Sefer Torah on, Ois Katan Chav Zayin, Shalo Yasichu. So we shouldn't be Mesiach Das from laning. And the Mishnah Berurah expands on this, and he says, what we do is, Umanichin hashnia ala shulchan, we put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima, Koidem HaKadosh. Remember, on Yom Tov, we lane 5 aliyahs, then we say Kaddish before and after. Put the second Sefer Torah on the Bima before the Kaddish. Why? Kedei sheyomer HaKadosh al shtein. Because really, remember, the Kaddish, this Chatzi Kaddish that we say at the end of laning, is really supposed to go on everything. It's supposed to go on the primary laning, on the maftir, and on the HaTorah. It's supposed to go on everything. The reason we put the Kaddish after the primary Kriya is to differentiate between the primary Kriya and the, quote, so to speak, secondary Kriyas. But since we want the Chatzi Kaddish really to go on the Kriya of the maftir also, put the maftir Sefer Torah on the Bima so that it should be on the Bima when the Baal Korah says Kaddish. Kedei sheyomer HaKadosh al shtein. V'achakach, after Kaddish, Magbiyan Rishona, do Hagba on the first one, V'Gelilah the Naisa, and do Gelilah on the first one, V'acha Gelilah Sebamapa, and after you finish the Gelilah complete with covering it with the mantle, Poischen Ashniya, open up the Sefer Torah, the second Sefer Torah, K'moshe Kasav HaMachaber, like the Machaber wrote. Ubiyayim sheyesh shloisha Sifrei Torah. What do you do on a day when there are 3 Sifrei Torah? Keep going, for example. Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechal b'Shabbos. Ooh, Rosh Chodesh Tevis, that's Chanukah. So now you have Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah. So now you're going to have 7 aliyahs in you're going to have 6 aliyahs in one Sefer Torah. The 7th aliyah is going to be Rosh Chodesh in the second Sefer Torah. And then the last aliyah is going to be in the maftir of Chanukah in the third Sefer Torah. So Kigon Rosh Chodesh Tev Shechal b'Shabbos Kai Gavna Azai Achar Shegomer Barishayna. After you finish 6 aliyahs in the first Sefer Torah, You can't say Kaddish yet. You know why? Because you only had 6 aliyahs. And on Shabbos you need 7 aliyahs minimum. So you can't say Kaddish yet. So you did 6 aliyahs in the first Sefer Torah. And in those 6 aliyahs you finished the Parsha. So let's say it's Parshas Miketz. You're going to finish Parshas Miketz in 6 aliyahs in the first Sefer Torah. Then Manichet Ashniya. Now put the second Sefer Torah, which is the Rosh Chodesh Sefer, which is going to be the 7th aliyah. Put that down on the bima. Ve'ein oimrim Kaddish, but don't say Kaddish. Because you only had 6 aliyahs so far. Rak Magbia Rishona, do Hagba on the first Sefer, the Gelilah, and do Gelilah on the first Sefer, the Chanal, and then open up the second Sefer Torah and lay in the 7th aliyah, which is going to be Rosh Chodesh. V'acha Gemar Kriyas Ashniya, when you finish that 7th aliyah of the Kriya of Rosh Chodesh, Manichet Ashlishis Etzla, put the 3rd Sefer Torah down on the bima next to it, Shehil Tzarech HaMafter, that's going to be the Mafter of Chanukah. They ain't tzarich la'aniach harishona, but don't take the first Sefer Torah and put it back on the bima. That you don't do. Rak omer chatzi kaddish al shnei sifrei Torah elu. Say a chatzi kaddish now. Now, when you say this chatzi kaddish, you're covering the first 7 aliyahs, because the second Sefer Torah, which is still on the bima now, that was aliyah number 7. So when you say a Kaddish now, with the second Sefer Torah and the 3rd Sefer Torah on the bima, that Kaddish is covering the first 7 aliyahs that took place in the first 2 Sifrei Torah. One is no longer on the bima, but the second one is on the bima. And the second one is the 7th aliyah from the first 7 aliyahs. And you have the 3rd Sefer Torah, the Maftir, is also on the bima. So now the Kaddish is going to cover all 3. Umagbia Ashniya, do Hagba on the 2nd Sefer Torah, and close it up, upayshten ashlishis, and then open the 3rd, the Gelilah Mafter, and then lane the Mafter. Let's just finish up over here this Ramah. Umoitzin shnei asfarim ka'achas. When you have 2 Sifrei Torah or 3 Sifrei Torah, you take all of them out at the same time. You might think not like that. You might think you have 3 Sifrei Torah, it's Shabbos, Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh. So okay, take out 1 Sefer Torah, lay in 6 aliyahs in Miketz. Then take out a 2nd Sefer Torah, lay in Rosh Chodesh. Then take out a 3rd Sefer Torah, lay in Chanukah. Why do you have to take out all Sefer Torah? Leave the Sefer Torah in the Aron as long as you can. Why is it a bigger covenant Torah that they should be sitting there? Says the Rama, no. We always take out all the Sefer Torah at one time. And somebody will have to hold the second one, or the second and the third, until you finish the laning from the first one. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton chav ches. You take both Sefer Torah out at the same time. That doesn't constitute bundling mitzvahs, taking them all out at the same time. And somebody will have to hold the 2nd Sefer Torah. Or if it's a Shabbos with 3 Sifrei Torah, you'll have to have one person holding the 2nd and one person holding the 3rd. And this is a very interesting Mishnah Berurah. There's some chidushim here in this Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Dahainu, what does it mean with Taifs and Ashniya? Shemoisrin Sefer, you'll have to give the Sefer Torah, Lemishu Sham Alabima, to somebody who's there by the bima, lachzikai, to hold it, achi egiezman kriyas hamafter, until it's time for the mafter. V'loi toiv adavar, the Chavetz Chaim says, and he brings this down from the Shavar Ephraim, it's not good, shenoyagin be'ezem ekaimis, the minig they have in some places, lemasroi lenar koton, to give the Sefer Torah to a little kid, to hold. Mr. Berurah doesn't like that minig. I know that was the minig when I was growing up in the Sfarish Shul. I was a little kid, 7, 8 years old. They used to give me the Sefer Torah to hold. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, he doesn't like it. It's not Bakavidik to the Sefer Torah to give it to a little kid. What if the candy man starts giving out candy and the little kid decides he wants to run and go get some candy? Right? So don't give it to a little kid. Elal kal panim yesh lamaskel ben das. Even if you're going to give it to a cotton, somebody who's not bar mitzvah, make sure you give it to a bardas. Gam, furthermore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Yizayar, you should take care ha'oiches a sefer, that the person who holds the 2nd or 3rd Sefer Torah, lehisrake ktsas min hatzad, he should go a little bit to the side of the bima. He shouldn't sit directly behind the bima. Kedei shelo yachzik hasefer achoyrei hakoyram b'Torah, so that he shouldn't be sitting in such a way that the Balkaira, the one who has the Aliyah, have their backs to the Sefer Torah. That's not a covet for the Sefer Torah, that the Balkaira has his back turned to the Sefer Torah. Now he has no choice. He's leaning from a Sefer Torah in front of him. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't sit right behind the Balkaira with the Sefer Torah. Move a little bit over to the left or to the right, so that you're not positioned right with the Balkaira's back to you, or with the Oila's back to you. Okay, with that we concluded Siman Kuf Mem Zayin. I know we went a little bit over time, but I wanted to finish the Siman. Please, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be made, and I got Sky Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should send Yeshua Sefuris Parnasset Shedukim Tol Al Zinid. We should be zeicher to see the BS Gal Tzedek. B'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.